Thank you for tuning in to another episode of One More Story. Just a quick programming note, parents, if you'd like to skip past the interview and go straight to the first story, you can find it at the 33-minute, 55-second mark, but the subscription option is there for you if you prefer to put on just the stories for the kids. And please be sure to leave us a review if you are enjoying the show. It helps boost our visibility on all the platforms. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's episode. My guests tonight are Evan Berger and Kevin LaFerriere. Ooh, I cracked on that. Let's try that again. My guests tonight are Evan Berger and Kevin LaFerriere, hosts of the popular Dumb Dads podcast, and you can also find their hilarious shorts on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you devour your short-form funnies. Kevin and Evan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having us.
That was quite possibly the nicest intro.
Yeah. I will say, wherever you devour short-form comedy, as long as it doesn't have an X paywall.
Yeah. Well, our stuff is free.
Yes. And I didn't want to call it content because it's better than, I don't know, content feels...
We don't mind content. It's the phrase influencer that gives us pause.
Well, but my wife met you at an influencer event.
We'll still go to the event.
I still got invited. I'm not going to turn down an invitation to a fun party. Yes, that is where we met your lovely wife. And here's the thing. I think since we started posting stuff and TikTok became a thing, all of it was influencers. And then now it's starting to separate a little bit between like an influencer, let's say a creator.
Creator is the other word.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think mostly because an influencer always feels to me so like personal. Come into my life, let me show you how I do this. This is how I organize see everything about me. And we don't really do that. We're posting like sketches and...
I also don't have the discipline to get ready with me.
No.
I'll think about that by lunch. I'm like, oh, well, the day's already
I
gone.
guess I should put some pants on.
So you guys started as improvisers, comedians, doing the sort of the traditional, actor route in LA, commercials, film, TV. Walk me back to the inspiration for the podcast, how it got started, and then how it evolved into a full-time gig for you guys.
Yeah, so I moved to LA from New York in 2013, and through a friend of a friend, started a sketch company. That same friend had recommended Evan start that sketch company, so we did that together with my wife, and then we did that for a while, did a web series together. Then that, obviously that all breaks apart eventually. Evan had his first kid, then I had my first kid, and then he had his second, and then right as we were about to have our second, I believe his wife recommended that maybe we should start a podcast, and that there's not a lot of podcasts for dads, and when there are, they give up after 3 episodes.
Well, like a lot of wives, the wives are like devouring stuff to learn before the baby comes.
Right.
And in doing that, they're like, there's like no dad podcasts out there, thinking like maybe you could read something, pick something up, look at something. There's a human coming into our lives.
So yeah,
there was like no podcast. And if there were dad podcasts out there, they like recorded an episode and then 6 months later released their second episode. So we knew if we were going to start something like that, we had to commit, has to be every week, must be every week. Otherwise, we'll do the same thing everybody else does that tries to start a podcast or anything and then just quits.
Yeah, and so we did that started that in like March of 2019 before my second was born.
Okay.
Which was a fun starting point for us because it was like I knew what was coming, so it wasn't all a surprise, but at the same time, it was like we can kind of document this journey of like, how's your wife feeling? We're almost there. Like it was like a few weeks out from her giving birth, and then gave birth, and then we went through all that journey. When we did that for a while, and then the pandemic hit, and we started doing the podcast remotely, which was awful. Because we did, like, you've used like Riverside.
Yeah.
We didn't know about Riverside. Maybe it didn't exist yet. I don't know. But we were using Zoom, which was awful.
I don't even think we started there, to be honest. I remember
We FaceTimed
him
Yeah.
so I could see him, and I would record audio remotely. He would record audio remotely, but we would call each other and put like the headphone in one ear with our headphones over the top.
Oh my God.
So I could hear his response, and then we would chat that way.
It
Now,
was insane.
that might have been like the worst way to do it, but that's what we thought of. So we went with it.
We had one episode where Evan was just like, who's flushing the toilet? And I was like, nobody. I told him I'm because I was recording in the bathroom because I was in an apartment at the time. And I was like, nobody's flushed. And then I realized I was like, oh no, I'm in a building. The neighbor above me just flushed their toilet.
Oh God.
And we're just hearing, well, that's the neighbor's waste passing by. So we did that for a little bit, and then we started potting together around the time that my wife and I moved into a house. And my wife, no, it's funny. I was like, his wife recommended the podcast, and then my wife was like, TikTok's kind of a thing. You should check into that. So I was on TikTok for like 2 weeks or so without posting anything, just like devouring content, seeing what this is about.
What are we getting into?
What is happening here? Which I still don't have an answer for. And then I was like, Evan, we should post on there as the Dumb Dads. Again, all of this is like to kind of promote the podcast is how it initially started. And it didn't take long for us to realize we could go back to our roots of sketch comedy. Because we were just posting, nonsense, like trash.
It's a lot of it's still on there. You can scroll all the way to the bottom; it's still there.
It's some bad stuff. We got rid of the worst stuff. But yeah, then when we started doing sketches that like would take off, we were like, oh, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll do sketch comedy in the parenting forum because we're experienced parents who've talked about it and are living it, and we're also sketch comedians. So let's go with that. And then that just kind of took off from there. And it's funny because now the podcast does really well. But it's like our social medias that are the ones that are very successful. And it's like, oh, we did that one to help that one. That didn't work out.
Yeah. Has it also helped you guys as far as recognition goes, like in traditional media, like for commercial auditions or their directors are like, oh, hey, I know those guys, bring them in, or like, has that had any effect on that?
Yeah, I think, not a massive effect, but certainly that keep us relevant in that space because there's a lot of people in that space, obviously. That was the initial thing too when we started it. When TikTok and Instagram which is actually you couldn't even post reels. Instagram wasn't even a thing. Like posting reels wasn't a thing when we were doing TikTok, and then Instagram was like, oh, that's a huge app. Maybe we should introduce something like that. So then now we just post across, and on YouTube and everything. But we were thinking if we get enough attention, we could probably get more auditions. That was like the initial idea. And then we started to realize, oh, this is more of like a brand kind of thing that we're creating without realizing we were doing it. And then now it's very nice. We go sometimes for a commercial audition or something like that, and one of the guys in the lobby running is going, hey, man, I love your stuff. Just something as nice as that. But you just kind of go, okay, so we have enough of an impression that it works with parents, but also we're kind of getting recognized for what we're doing.
Right.
Which is nice. I don't think we've booked anything because of that, but
it's tough out there.
That's staying in the it's hard out there. That is staying in what you said, the traditional way, which is move here to become an actor, get nowhere.
Well, you have to make your own stuff. Like it's such an uphill battle otherwise, and you're smart enough, you're talented enough, you're funny enough, and we have access now to all the technology, and we have an audience right there with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and you might as well.
I think we just thought of it from a producer's or anybody's from their point of view, which is like, if you have something to show me, then show it to me. The excuse is like, well, I can't because that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
You can, we did the most 80% of everything we do is with our phones. And good audio, and we pair it later. But if we film something, we step in and use, higher end cameras and stuff. But for the most part, we produce our content with phones. And
yeah, I will say we're lucky in that regard, like luckier than earlier generations of actors in that, haven't done a TV show or anything like that. But at the same time, it's like I can't really complain because I get to do what I love, and I'm really enjoying it. I kind of get to do it on my terms. There's an audience for it. And so everybody kind of has that advantage now of like, if you want to make something, make it. Because you can just post it. And now phone cameras are incredible now. The audio is not bad on phone cameras either. So it's kind of nice. And it's like, it is funny that we started it that way to be like, maybe we'll get another audition. But at the same time, it's like, well, I'm kind of already doing what I want.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's awesome too.
Because it's a full-time gig now. You guys are... which, I mean, you just want to earn a living doing what you love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So mission accomplished.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which it feels insane,
It-
but
Yeah.
somehow we're here. We're very lucky.
Yeah.
So what was tell me about like the early days of the podcast, like what was, because I'm in the relative early days of my podcast.
Yeah.
What kind of traction, listenership was it early on? And then what was the watershed? Was there a moment where it just took off? I think with like a TikTok video you'd mentioned.
Yeah. The first video that took off, that did well. I wouldn't say took off. The first video that did well was one called The Pros to Being a Stay-at-Home Dad. And it was just pros versus cons, and it was just written as if it was a work job. The pros of working from home, every day is casual Friday, that kind of stuff. And then the cons are just like all the horrible things about parenting. That did well. And then a Confessions of a Parent was the first one that took off. And then, we started to see the analytics of like downloads going up. But I will say the early days of the podcast, we had some growing pains for sure. We didn't know. We just knew we were going to talk about parenting, talk about our week. We had eventually come up with the idea of coming up with what we call a dumb dad moment. What was your dumb dad moment this week? Like, you have one. And if you don't, just text your wife. She has one ready. Like,
She probably has a list of them.
what was my dumb dad moment this week? You don't remember. Well, this is not a great start. But we were like, we were responding to like, parenting articles at first, just growing pains and stuff like that. And then we kind of quickly realized that doing a quick recap of our week, what's going on, because people want to know. And that's like the imposter syndrome that I have of like, nobody cares about my life or my children. And people do. Like whenever we do open up, like really open up, not that we don't on the podcast every week, we do talk about our lives, but when we talk about real hardships, we get emails and messages and stuff like that. So now it is kind of every week, a weekly recap with a dumb dad moment. Got to bring the dumb dad moment. And that's kind of been our formula. And then that's been it's been good for us.
Yeah, it's fun to have guests on. We don't have a lot of guests on, but when we do, we say, please bring like a dumb, if you did something stupid, an all-timer. We talk about it every week, but we've definitely had some bangers over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But we ask somebody, like, if you got a good one, bring it, and then tell us your story, so then we kind of all get to tell our dumb parenting moment. And that's the one thing I'll say from the very start of any of this. We thought, I mean, it all kind of started with like the idea of like the dad we watched on TV growing up is just like some fumbling idiot who can't get anything right.
Yeah.
Also because he doesn't even try.
Yeah.
And it just felt like that joke is so old now. It's so old and it's not relatable anymore. But then the more you try to be an active dad, parent in general, you realize this is so hard because every step is something I've never done before. Or,
right.
And it was just like, let's get rid of the stereotype of that dad and just make it more about you're going to feel stupid because this is really hard.
Right.
No matter how active you are,
right.
You're going to feel stupid and you're going to feel dumb. So just try to keep the dumb silent. Mm-hmm. The dumb is silent, the dumb dads. And so that's kind of that's like our little filter we push everything through.
Right. So you brought up, sort of these cliche dads from our childhood from TV.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys parent differently from your dads?
Real quick, by the way, the name Dumb Dad came from us auditioning as dads. Like that's where the name of the podcast came from. Was like, I gotta audition tomorrow. Like, you want to go to the playground tomorrow? I got an audition in the morning. Oh, what's your audition for? I'm just playing a dumb dad. Like that's how it started. Yeah. Like it was just like, because it's always like every commercial audition. It's just like the dad comes in and he's just like field dresses like a deer in the living room or something, and you're just like, oh, I didn't know it, but Bounty. And it's like,
I don't think Bounty's gonna quick pick that up. I mean, there's a lot.
They claim.
Yeah.
But yeah, different from my own parent. It's so tough. I can say on my end, both my parents worked. I wasn't a latchkey kid, but I was pretty close to a latchkey kid. That both my parents worked day jobs. My dad, we have like videos of him. He was around when we were, or at least when my older brothers were my oldest age. He was working nights and she was working days, which is what I was doing before the pandemic. I was bartending nights and my wife was working days, so I was always home with the kids. So I have that similarity to my dad, and it's a very nice moment. But then they eventually both kind of transitioned to working the 9 to 5s, and it is funny the cliche of like before streaming. your parents wanted to watch their shows. Like there's certain things that like we don't do now as parents. I want to catch up with Ted Lasso or whatever. I'm not watching shows when my kids are awake. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, you can do that whenever you want.
But that's not what it was growing up.
Yeah.
Like I remember I went in and asked my mom something and she was watching like The West Wing. And I was like, hey mom, shh. Like, I can't rewind it, idiot. This isn't the future. Like, I have one shot to hear this scene.
When Bounty comes on, that's when you can come in the room.
So there are like certain aspects of parenting that are different. And there's no judgment to my parents. I just think like some of it was just like they got to do and did what they wanted to do. They were great parents. Are still great parents. And it's just funny how like now it's like, it feels like parenting now is like much more, I don't want to say involved because I don't want to like belittle the older parents, but like it's all about them at the time. And then if you want some time to yourself, that's when they go to bed or that's when they're at school. And
Right.
that's your time for you.
Right.
And otherwise it's their time kind of thing.
I think growing up, I still even now, even in hindsight, had amazing parents, and they always encouraged. I have a younger brother and sister. They always encouraged us to do what we want, remain happy, like all these very sort of cliche things. But it was like that's how our family operated. It was just they never like said no to something, when we wanted to try it or whatever. And so I definitely take that with me as how I parent the same. It's hard to say how I parent differently because it was so. It's like it's almost cliche to say I parented differently because like there was no internet when I was a little kid.
Well, yeah.
There was no iPads when I was a little kid. I mean, so it's like it's all from such a crazy different perspective now that I think even in the world of parenting, it feels not even close. I mean, your village was your neighborhood and your family when I was a kid, and your village now is the same, but also all of the internet, in so many different ways that I don't even, all I can think is to take little things about stuff I loved about my mom and dad growing up. And there was never anything that I disagreed with so hard.
Right.
I would say my mom and dad maybe were a little, I don't even really want to say strict, protective over us. But the same thing. My dad left for work at like 6 a.m. My mom would come home at like 6 p.m., like how that overlapped. So yeah, we had babysitters after school. Somebody would come because my mom and dad wouldn't come home until around dinner time, so not full latchkey kid, but knowing that my mom and dad were away, there was like rules that they expected us to abide by until they got home, which is like, if you want to go outside and ride your bikes, that's totally fine. Don't go past the mailboxes, which was like at the end of the street. Like don't go out into the road, down the main none of that. Just stay within our neighborhood.
Right.
So it was kind of like that. What's funny is that maybe you grow up in your 20s and think like, my kids are not going to be Dude, I can't even, like, I don't even like losing sight of my kid at the playground. So it's, everything changes like crazy when you have a kid. Your perspective of your parents versus when you become a parent, it flips so hard.
What about you?
Well, I do think it's a product of our time. I do try to take some of the Gen X latchkey kid sensibilities I grew up with and give the kids some freedom, but we live in LA. And I grew up in South Carolina. So,
yeah.
And in suburban, DC, and we would just ride our bikes, come home for dinner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, statistically, it was far more dangerous. There were kids getting kidnapped all the time. Like it was like, it
Yeah,
was.
you're right.
It's actually a statistically safer time for kids, but I don't know. It is weird because I talk to a lot of parents about this. Like we are way more involved. And I think also the three of us are stay-at-home dads, and so we take a bigger role, as far as, cooking meals during the week and picking kids up and all of that. So we're naturally more involved, but yeah, I mean, I also, for me, I was pretty comfortable sharing with my parents like stuff that I was, going through, but I didn't get it like. I always felt like there was a big generational gap because my parents were born in the 40s, right? The early 40s.
Yeah.
And so there were just things like they always just felt of a different generation because they were.
Yeah, of course.
And I think now, because, my wife and I both work in entertainment and we are very aware of trends and social media and all of that. And now, because my kids are older, a little bit older than your kids, so just wait for it. It gets, it gets.
How old?
11 and 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like my son shared his playlist with us and every song has an E next to it.
Yeah.
You know, so like I have to like, but it's been good because I want to give my kids the tools to navigate what this world looks like with the internet, social media, and all that. So
Yeah.
I've had really candid conversations with my son about lyrics and music.
Mm-hmm.
And, he'll be reciting these things and not really know what they mean. And I'm
Sure.
like, well, I can't just hide the fact that they're getting this, right? The dam is broken. It's rushing in. So I want to at least
Yeah.
give him a boat or a life raft
Yeah.
to survive
I
this.
love that. That's a good analogy.
So thanks. Just off the top of my head. And and so I'm like, well, let's break down what this verse means.
Yeah.
I think I'm having much more candid conversations with my kids.
Yeah.
And just sort of accepting the reality that growing up and you know this as your kids are now getting like you have memories of when you were that age.
Yeah, we're getting
Yeah.
there.
You know.
We're at the point of like, yeah, I remember this.
Yeah. So it's like, oh God, this was happening in middle school, in my middle school. Oh, I better have a talk with him about that because that's going to be happening.
I think that's the most important thing is it just simple little communication.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's another good point you brought up about the relationship with your father in terms of like what you would talk about. Not as much as everyone is just completely open now to speak with their kids like they're adults. Sometimes that's the thing that I think is a little confusing to me sometimes. What is too much information
Yeah.
versus what they can comprehend? It was sort of the same thing with the pandemic is like, I don't want to give them every single detail
Right.
of what's going on, but my son was old enough at the time, he was about 5 at the time, to understand like why we're wearing masks, because there's a scary germ going around and, we don't want to get it if we can avoid it. So that's why we're not going to see people for a while. But you're not like, because man, they're dropping like flies over in Europe, like because you shared a space for 5 seconds. Okay, wipe down your feet. You're going to kill the whole family. Like that, obviously we're not going that far, but
Right.
there's a balance there between like how much information do you share?
Right.
I don't think he's not going to be able to have a perspective on the full scale of it. So
Yeah, you have to gauge it age by age. And also I had an older brother to filter a lot, like, so any of the sex talk stuff, like I was just like, hey Sal, explain this to me.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go to my parents because I was totally uncomfortable, because no one likes talking to their parents about this. I mean, when I talk to my son, he's like, Dad, I'm so uncomfortable, just
Yeah.
leave my room. I'm like, this is not comfortable for me either, like I don't love
Yeah.
this, but
the more you do it, the more comfortable it will become.
yeah, and you keep the channel of communication
Yeah.
open.
It's funny how open I was about asking my parents things that now looking back as a parent, I'm like, what a nightmare moment for them. Like,
Yeah.
like I was like,
In the middle of West Wing.
I mean, I think I was like driving back
huge
from. Oh, good. Bounty's on. All right. So what is? No, I was like driving home from like, I don't know, karate or something, and I just blindsided my dad. I'm just like, so what's a virgin? And he was just like, I don't remember him reacting at all. Like I just remember us talking and having a little bit of a talk, and then having a longer talk another day. But I know in that moment he was like, come on, man. Like,
I'm just trying to drive.
can we just get back to you
I know.
not breaking that board earlier?
The balsa wood, by the way.
Let's talk about disappointment.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get home.
Yeah.
I think dinner's ready. Let's just get there first.
Oh, brutal.
We were talking about sort of moments in the podcast and the growth of your brand. How important was the press conference for growing things for you guys?
Here's what I think is so funny about this. We were just talking about core memories.
Yeah.
That's like a core moment for us. Specifically because, so I play fantasy football with my friends, and before Dumb Dad Anything existed, during one of the years we were playing fantasy, I think I didn't make the playoffs. And so I had this idea to make a press conference as me, the fantasy owner, getting asked all these questions about all the mistakes I made, which led to me not getting into the playoffs. And I posted in our group thread. That's all it was. Fast forward into Dumb Dads. We're posting all the time. We're posting every day, always trying to think of a new idea. And I just thought of that one day. And oh, how funny would that be if it's like the day of parenting is the game, and then you had to answer questions all the time. And the funny thing to me would be that this is like his 500th one because you got to do it every day. So I started working on it. But the reason why it's a core moment for us is because Kevin was watching his brother's kids at the couple days before. and he was in the backyard, and he has this idea about like like a lot of our ideas. One thing happens in kind of reality, and then you think, oh, that's kind of funny, and then you write a bunch of jokes around that. His daughter kind of like halfway said something snippy to him. Wasn't even that mean, but he thinks like, oh, how funny would it be if she was like creatively mean as a kid?
Like wildly mean.
Wildly mean, very like cutting. And in a smart way. So he was like working on this bit, like in the moment. He's like in the backyard, they're all playing, and he films this bit and sends it to his wife. He's like, "Is this funny?" And she's like, "Yeah, post it. It's great." So he posts it, and I had been working on the idea of the press conference for a couple of days, like trying to figure out how to shoot it because it's kind of technically advanced. I was doing all the flash bulbs and everything manually myself. So I was like trying to figure out how to even shoot this thing. So I kind of make it, and I'm editing it, and then he posts that clip, and it goes way more viral than anything we'd ever posted. It was like at 1 million views in like 24 hours.
Wow.
And we were like, whoa, that's great. And, 30,000 followers in 2 days, like that kind of thing. We were like, whoa, this is crazy. So I sent him the press conference thing. Was like, what do you think about this? And he was really smart. He was like, well, first of all, let's not post anything for like a day or two and let this, which I agreed with, like, let's just let this video ride because the video he posted is so funny. And we were just kind of like, let's let this wave come down for a second and then let's post it. Because he was like, it's good. I think we should cut the top joke and the bottom joke, leave him wanting more. This is funny. This is going to go nuts. So it was like 2 moments in a row for us. We waited 2 days or 3 days, and then I posted the press conference, and then that went nuts. And that went nuts outside of just the general platforms. On Twitter, I think.
It went viral on Twitter. Like we were on Twitter just to have the handle, but we didn't rarely post. Certainly weren't posting videos. I think like a joke here and there, but someone who came across it on one of the platforms, grabbed it, posted it on Twitter, tagged us. It was very nice. Tagged us. That video went viral. So her post went viral, but because she did the right thing and tagged us, we got the attention on all the platforms and stuff and got the credit and stuff, which was really, really generous and nice.
Doesn't always happen.
It doesn't always happen. Look what I posted. What is this? So she posted that and then it went viral and we were like, oh, I guess we have to pay attention to Twitter now. We don't, which is great news.
There's too many things. There's so many things.
We don't anymore. But yeah, then it went crazy and I mean 60,000 followers in like 5 days. And we had another video that got us 60,000 because like we got on TikTok. Like you can go on TikTok now and make a video get 2 million views and you won't get that many followers. Like those days are kind of gone, which is weird. It's not that you can't get followers anymore. It's just like you don't get this like wave of like, this is a great video, I will follow you. That doesn't happen as much anymore, if at all. But when we started TikTok, we got to the end of that wave. So we had posted a video that went viral and got a bunch of followers. And then the presser went viral. And that's kind of just like, changed the trajectory of our lives with the direction of where everything has gone now since then. Is like, we still like to do variety because the internet loves you to do the same thing over and over and over again. But I find that to be boring. Even people that like I like, and I'm like, they're so creative. I'll go to that page and like, oh, they're doing that again. That's all they do. I mean, so we still do the press conferences, try to do it once a week. Doesn't always happen, but because it takes a lot to make. But we still like to do variety because we are still sketch writers at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
The press conferences are amazing. I mean,
they're fun.
They're spot on.
They're really fun. And then once we do like what Kevin just said, the internet's like, okay, good. You do that thing, do that only.
Right.
And we were like, well, we'll just pigeonhole ourselves if that's the only thing this account does.
Yeah.
So we waited a long time before we did another one.
It probably takes like 3 to 4 hours to do a press conference from start to finish. That's not including editing. Like to set everything up, to write it, to edit the writing, and then to sit down and film it and get it right. It's like it takes a long time.
But we love doing it because it's fun. The idea of it's great. I mean, I still think we probably have like 3 or 4 or 5 consistent ideas. The idea is so good, but you can kind of continuously do it and just change the sketch a bunch of times.
Right.
One of my favorite things we do is Parenting Through Time that Kevin started doing.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's like, just be straight up 50s dad, completely make fun of 50s dad, say the most terrible thing, you're most uninvolved, whiskey in the hand, awful, and then
doesn't understand kids or how they work,
and then jump to 80s and he's like always has a Coors Light in his hand, and it's like sort of passively like grow up to a 3-year-old. Like they're so funny to us to write those and do those that we just, when they've done well, we think sometimes stuff like that does well, and you're like, yes, we get to do this again. Because now we'll do stuff again to like help people understand, like, this is a fun idea. Come on, you guys, like, this is good.
Yeah.
But stuff like that works, we think like this is great because we can do this, once a month or bi-weekly or something, and some of those bits we think are just so funny, and there's just endless parenting stuff to mine from good ideas like that.
Speaking of continuing to mine ideas, what are the next steps for you guys as far as evolving your brand? Are there next steps?
Yeah, no, for sure.
So tomorrow, the Dumb Dads is done. It's over.
We did a season with America's Funniest Videos, AFV. Although
Okay.
they're called Always Funny Videos now, but it's AFV. And we did like a season with them where we did like a clip show with them. That was a lot of fun. Certainly we'd love to branch out and have a show someday, would be obviously like the goal. Again, we're just looking for auditions.
It never ends.
Yeah. But no, I mean,
Still gonna have to audition for our own show.
but we love the idea of dads, involve dads as a show. It's not uncharted territory by any means, but at the same time, as you were even saying, like, the world is different than it was for our parents. We have the internet on one hand. On the other hand, it's very normal for a dad to be very involved, as they should be. So, that idea is something we would love to tackle and have the Dumb Dads kind of move into the television space would be super rad.
So with everything you've got going on, posting stuff all the time, keeping the podcast running, how do you wind down at night, and how do you wind your kids down at night?
I think, that's a great question because it's like, it's almost more of like a drop off. I don't even feel like there's a wind down because when you're, everything, we sort of have a job, but we don't have jobs because we make our content whenever we can, when it fills our spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, that means like, it's funny. It translates to like, I want to be an actor. I want to do this because I can't do like a 9-to-5 situation. I'm not built like that, but we probably work like 80 hours a week, so we're kind of always either writing something down or filming something or meeting at your house and podcasting late or going live together or whatever it is. And I wouldn't change any of it. I love it. It just means the weekdays are chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
We have swim. My son's in soccer. He does like they have classes at the Y that they take, and same thing with both of our kids. It's always all over the place. So it feels like the time to wind down is when we get home, we have dinner, we start the process of like taking a bath, whatever it is, brushing our teeth, get the kids down, read a couple stories, and it's like that's pretty much the end of our day. That's around 8:30 is like good night, see you later, shut the door. Between 8:30 and 9 average. So it's like, do I feel like staying up a little bit or working on something? Do I need to finish editing something? Can I maybe watch 3/4 of an episode of one thing before I fall asleep on the couch? Do I make that decision or do I just go to bed right now? And probably two days a week, I just like, I'm done. I'm going to bed because I got to do it all again tomorrow. And
Yeah.
I love it, but I know it doesn't ever feel like, all right, this is the point of the day where I'm going to like kick my feet up, and like, it doesn't feel like that to me really.
Yeah, I either screw it up and stay up way too late.
Yeah, that's probably the other 2 days a week is like, maybe I'll turn a video game on.
Turn a
1
video
a.m.
game
Oh
on.
my God.
Bed by midnight. No, come on, man. Or I go to bed. Like last night, I went to bed. It's you can't win. Last night I went to bed. Shortly after, like we put the kids down, my wife and I watched a show while we had dinner, and like one episode, and then it was like, let's go to bed. And it was like 9:30. Let's go to bed. This will be great. And then, great, I'll get sleep tonight. And then my son comes into our room in the middle of the night and is just kicking me in the face all night. So I didn't really get a good night's sleep. So I should have stayed up till midnight. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks for coming by today. Are you guys ready to dive in to a bedtime story?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. The first word is hat. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who had a favorite hat, and she would wear that hat all the time. She would wear it to school. She would wear it to fancy dinners out with her parents, even when they told her that there were no hats allowed. She loved this hat more than she loved any stuffed animal she had. And she had a lot of stuffed animals. She had a bear named Bobby. She had a stuffed fish, which was an odd choice of a stuffed animal because it looked like it had been taxidermied. But she did love that fish. That fish's name was Roger, and she had a raccoon that was named Rack. She called him Rack because he was a raccoon. And they were great, but they were not as special to her as her hat. And the thing about the hat that was special was that it was given to her by an old woman who lived in the neighborhood named Genevieve. And that old woman used to be her nanny when she was very young and lived in the neighborhood and would take care of her. And this young girl, whose name was Sarah, would go over to Genevieve's house. And when Genevieve wouldn't come over and nanny, they were so close that Sarah would just come over just to hang out, even if she didn't need a babysitter. And Genevieve would always bake these amazing brownies and cookies, and she always had those little Andes candies that you get at the restaurants, the delicious mint sandwich in between the chocolate. She loved those things, and Genevieve always had a tray of those. And anyway, one day when Sarah was about 5 years old, she went over to Genevieve's, and Genevieve wanted to show her around the house because Sarah hadn't really explored much of the house. She would always just, hang out in the living room, and they would have snacks, and they would do these little tea parties. Genevieve wouldn't make tea for Sarah because she was 5, and you can't give caffeine to 5-year-olds, so she would just give her, some lemonade or something in a cup. But Sarah loved to pretend that it was tea. So anyway, they had some tea, they had some of these wonderful brownies, and Genevieve took Sarah up to her office. She had an office. It was like an art studio, actually, because Genevieve was an artist. And her husband had long since passed away. It used to be his office, and she had converted it into this art studio. And she would make all sorts of things. She would paint, she would sculpt. I mean, it was a large office. She even had a table saw in there. She was like a hardcore builder, creator. It was one of those table saws that had like an exhaust fan, because I don't know if you've ever used a table saw, but if you don't have anything to suck the sawdust out, it just fills a room, and if you breathe that in, it's really not good for your lungs. So anyway, Genevieve was showing Sarah around the room. Immediately, Sarah went to the table saw because she thought it was cool, and Genevieve very gently slapped her hand away and said, "You shouldn't be touching table saws. You're 5 years old, and it's very dangerous." And so she said, "Oh, okay, well, thank you for letting me know that." And then something caught her eye in the corner of the room. It was this hat. And as Sarah moved closer to the hat,
She noticed it was sitting on top of this little doll. And this little doll was on this little chair, but she was positioned in a way as if she was watching over the room. And so Sarah asked Genevieve, "Well, why is this doll here?" She says, "Well, that's my creativity doll. And when I'm feeling stuck and I'm in my room thinking of something I want to create, and I feel lost or I don't know what to put on my blank canvas, I turn and I talk to the doll, and she will give me a creative idea. Sometimes she suggests a painting, one time she suggested a coffee table, so I had to buy the table saw. And she's always there for me when I feel stuck." Now, Sarah thought this was particularly inspiring because she told Genevieve that often she feels the same way. Sometimes at school or sometimes at home, and she feels stuck and she doesn't know what the next thing to do might be. And that's when Genevieve took the hat off of the doll and placed it on little Sarah's head. She said, "Whenever you're feeling stuck, you can think about your creativity doll and the hat, and maybe it will inspire you to have an idea." So years go by, and Genevieve was always in Sarah's life until one day she decided she was going to move away. Now, this was very hard for Sarah because Genevieve was such an inspiring person in her life. But when Miss Genevieve had to move away, that's when Sarah decided she would always keep this hat very close to her, almost always on her head, to remind her of Genevieve and the times they had together. But more importantly, it gave her confidence to be herself at school and even in a restaurant where she felt like there's so many adults here and everyone's looking at me and I feel like I don't know what to say or do. She would feel confident with the hat on. One day in school, it was Sarah's turn to present a big project. Now, this wasn't any project. This was sort of like the volcano projects you're supposed to do in school, but the teacher said you must make it your own. Now, Sarah didn't know what to do. She looked up how to make the volcano project. Everybody does the same thing. Baking soda, put it in the brown clay volcano, and it spurts everywhere. She didn't know how to solve this problem until she thought about Genevieve and the hat. And so she thought, I'm going to make the most fabulous volcano anyone has ever seen, inspired by my hat. Her volcano was 2 feet tall. It was sparkly. It had movement. It spun around. And she used everything she could think of to make it the most colorful, beautiful volcano any of the children or her teachers had ever seen. When it came to the day to present their volcanoes, Genevieve was very worried that maybe the mechanism she built wouldn't work. She started to get very nervous, thinking, did I put too much into this? Did I overbuild this? What if the baking soda mixture isn't right? But her dad helped her load it into the car, and they drove to school, Genevieve with her hat on. And when it came time to present, and all of the children were standing around, Genevieve plugged her volcano in. It started to spin around, and everyone was in total shock.
When sparkles and foam came shooting out all over the walls in classroom, and all the children cheered and were so happy that Sarah had made such an amazing and inspiring invention, so that Sarah was passed on and was the winner in her whole school for the science project, and she got to go to the state-wide science competition, and she was very excited to do it, and she was representing her school, and she was so proud. And so just like she did the previous time, she had to make it even bigger this time. So she made it 4 feet tall with sparkles and extra foam, and she had it battery powered, so she just needed to press a button and it would launch from across the room. And her goal was to have the foam and sparkles shoot 20 feet in the air, because this science fair was going to be outside, obviously, because Sarah's not the only kid in this competition making some overly ambitious projects, and that classroom still needs to be cleaned up because it was quite a mess. It's that corkboard ceiling. It was everywhere. So on the day of the statewide science fair, she packed everything into her car. Her dad drove her. She had the hat with her. And when she got there, she had set up, and she was so nervous, but also so excited. And she set up everything. Her family was there. Her mom, her dad, even Roger the fish was there. Sarah asked that Mom bring Roger the fish. It's just a stuffed fish. I know it looks real. It's uncanny how it looks like a real fish. It's kind of upsetting if you see it at night, but it's fine. It's a very nice fish. So when it was Sarah's turn to present, she went up and went to put her hat on her head. It wasn't there. She didn't have her hat with her. So Sarah got very scared and very nervous and suddenly very shy. And the group of people seemed 8 times bigger than when they were before. And she felt 10 times smaller than she did before. She didn't know what to do. She was scared to talk or present. But then she remembered Genevieve. Genevieve was her whole inspiration. And Genevieve didn't have a hat on. She had the doll with the hat on. But Genevieve was also inspired. She had that big table saw. She was a creator, and she still did stuff. So Sarah knew, I don't know that I need the hat. I just need the thought. I just need the idea of what the hat made me feel. And she did that, and she mustered up all her strength, and she pressed the button, and everyone was covered in glitter and foam. And so was her first place trophy that she won for the statewide science fair. And she dedicated her trophy and named it Genevieve. The end.
Kevin and Evan, are you ready for one more story?
I'm ready for another. I'm not sleepy yet, so I could use another one.
All right. The word is net.
So little Jason was very excited for his camping trip. He had never gone camping before, but he had heard all these tall tales from his dad about how exciting it was and that they were going to go fishing for the very first time. And Jason was super excited to go fishing because it's something his dad liked. And sometimes when there's certain things that your parents like, you like to do them. And then there's certain things your parents do that you don't like to do, like taxes. That seems awful. And mom and dad have to do them every year. Jason thought, I don't want to ever have to do that, but let's focus on fishing. So the day came to go camping. Jason packed up everything he needed, and they drove out into the woods right by this beautiful lake. It was called Lake Clearwater. They started unpacking everything, and Jason asked his parents, where do we plug in the lights? His dad laughed. We don't plug in anything. We're camping. We're out here, and we are just going to use lamps and candles, and we're going to use a fireplace. Oh, that's kind of weird, but kind of cool. And then they set up the tents, and he was like, where's the mattress to put our beds? Sorry, bud, that's not how camping works. You're going to be sleeping on the floor. Am I in trouble? He asked his parents. Why do I have to sleep on the floor? Dad said, well, sometimes it's just fun to do. And Jason said, Dad, sometimes you lay on the floor because of your back problems. Dad was like, that's not what I'm talking about. This is camping, okay? You sleep on the floor. And he's like, okay. So they get everything ready. They're all situated and they're set up. Jason said, all right, Dad, I'm ready to go fishing. The dad laughed. Not so fast, buddy. You got to wait until early in the morning to go fishing. And Jason was like, all right, Dad, you wake me up. I'm excited. We'll go fishing. That night they had a fun dinner. They had s'mores because, listen, if you go camping, you have to have s'mores. If you're listening to this, you're going camping, you're just in charge as the little kid of making sure the s'mores get packed, okay? And a good pillow. So he went to bed that night and he had a tough time sleeping. It was a little scary sleeping outside, even though you were inside a tent. Hearing different sounds. It's a weird place to sleep. He's on the floor. He still kind of felt like he did something wrong. Who sleeps on the floor? But here we are. He had a tough time sleeping, but he did eventually fall asleep. The next morning,
When they woke up, Jason turned to his dad. His dad turned to Jason, and they both just kind of gave each other a nod, acknowledging it's time. So they quietly pulled their boots on, quietly pulled their jackets on, not to wake Mom and Sister, and they quietly unzipped the tent and snuck out to the middle of the campsite. There was a tiny couple of embers burning from the fire before that night with a little stream of smoke. It was cold. Everything had a little bit of water. Everything was a tiny bit wet from the dampness of the night before. Dad grabbed tackle box and the poles, and Jason was in charge of holding the net. When they marched down to the side of the lake, the water looked like glass. Almost hard to tell that it was even water. It was so still and quiet, and Dad picked just the right spot where he told Jason, this is where I've always fished. This is where my dad took me to fish, and we've always used that net. Now, Jason, again, had never been fishing before, so he was very excited. So, Dad opened the tackle box. He showed Jason how to bait the hook, and they put a couple of weights on and tossed him into the water. Now, again, Jason didn't know what to do next. What do we do now, Dad? Now we wait. Now, that didn't sound super fun to Jason, because asking little kids to just sit there and wait was a difficult task on its own. Can I throw rocks into the water? No, we don't want to disturb the fish. Can I stand in the water? No, we don't want to disturb the fish. So Jason and his dad just sat there and waited. Now, lucky for them, because Dad knew the special spot. Only about 10 minutes later, one of the poles started to move up and down. So Dad quickly ran with Jason over to the pole. They grabbed it together, and he showed Jason how to reel it in. The pole was almost pulling really hard. It was hard to hold. Dad had to help Jason reel it in. And they reeled and fought this fish all the way into shore. And what happened next was the most magical thing Jason had ever seen. When the fish got close, Dad told Jason to grab the net. He scooped it under the fish, and lifted it into the air. And when he did, the fish turned solid gold.
Jason's dad was jaw-dropped. He had heard tales from his grandfather, who was told by his grandfather, that there were golden fish in Lake Clearwater, but he had never seen one before. And in all honesty, Jason's dad wasn't a very good fisherman to begin with. It's one of those things that your parents say they're good at something, or you just kind of assume it, and as you get older, you realize, maybe not. So Jason's dad had never caught a golden fish, never mind even saw one before. Now Jason is struggling to hold this thing because gold is pretty heavy, and a solid gold fish is super heavy. So Jason's about to drop it, and he does. He unfortunately drops the net, and the fish turns from gold back into fish and swims away. Now Jason gets real upset, and he gets a little sad. And his dad claps him on the back and is laughing. Son, we have seen something only your great-great-grandfather has seen. A golden fish in Lake Clearwater. That's something to be excited about. But we didn't catch it, Dad, said Jason. Jason's dad smiled at him. Fishing isn't just about catching things. It's about the experience together. Like with all things, it's the journey, not the destination. Jason didn't really understand this catchphrase because he wasn't allowed to really move. So what journey? We're just standing in one spot. Can't even stand in the water. So they went back up to their campsite as Jason's arms were very tired from holding up a golden fish. They went up. He told his mom and his sister, who both rolled their eyes at Jason, thinking he's telling another one of his tall tales, like the robot that flew overhead their house that one time. It didn't really fly over. It was just a drone. He'd never seen one before, and he was pretty convinced there were robots taking over. That's a story for another time. They had lunch, they had dinner, and Jason was quiet for pretty much the rest of the day. So Jason's dad pulled him aside and said, "You're still pretty bothered about that golden fish, huh?" Jason thought, "Yeah, Dad. But what if we caught it? Wouldn't that be like the greatest thing in the world? We could take it back and show everybody, and we could show Grandpa, who's still around, that the golden fish story is true." Jason's dad smiled and said, "We can try again tomorrow, and if we catch the fish, great. But if you don't, you need to promise me that you're not going to get upset by it. You can get discouraged, and that's okay, but don't let it ruin your whole day. Part of trying new things is learning how to succeed and learning how to fail. And this is just another part of it. So we can try again tomorrow, but you have to promise me that no matter what happens, you're going to have fun and you're going to be grateful for the adventure." And it was a little hard for Jason because, a golden fish is probably worth a ton of money and could really change their life. And then Mom and Dad wouldn't have to worry about the taxes thing so much. But Jason agreed. "Okay, tomorrow, no matter what happens, I promise we'll have fun." So that night, they had their dinner. Jason had, again, more s'mores than he probably should. He had 4, and he had enough that Mom and Dad gave a look to each other we might be in some trouble later. Then that night, Jason went to bed, and when he woke up the next morning,
He turned to his dad turned to him, they gave the nod, and they did the same thing again. They got up quietly, although there was a couple of from Dad because that was night 2 sleeping on the ground for him. Not as easy for a little kid like Jason. They went down to the lake and they fished. They fished for 2 hours, not one bite. Nothing. Jason felt discouraged in a different way. "I thought this was the special spot. We didn't catch anything." His dad turned to him and said, "Well, like my dad told me, there's always next year." And year after year, Jason would go fishing with his dad at the same spot in the same lake with the same net, trying to catch another golden fish. After about 10 years, never seemed to catch one. And one Thanksgiving, they were over at Grandma and Grandpa's, the whole family, and Grandpa pulled Jason aside and said, "I'd like to show you something." And he brought him into his office, and he brought him over to this big wooden box. And he said, "Your father told me a story from when you were little about your first time you went fishing and how you've always been trying to catch that golden fish. Well, I just want to show you that if you stay patient and don't get too discouraged, once in a while you might get lucky." and he undid the lock of the special wooden box and lifted the hatch, and there was a big, beautiful golden fish, shiny and bright, laying in this purple velvet. Now Jason couldn't believe his eyes. This is only the second golden fish he'd ever seen. "Grandpa, you've had this fish the whole time and never said anything to anybody?" Said, "Well, your dad knows I have it, and he knows one day he'll have one too. So you just gotta stay patient, because one day, maybe this will be yours. But if you think about it, you might be able to grab one too." And that is forever why Jason loves going camping and loves going down to Lake Clearwater, just to maybe one day catch his own golden fish. The end.